You're right, Kitty. Reality is nothing more than a shared dream. Yes, I agree. We are all insane to an extent. It's just a matter of whose insanity benefits whom. Who taught you to say a word like that?
It's been a while since I talked about a point-and-click game, which, by the way, is one of my favorite genres, especially horror point-and-click games. I don't know what it is about horror games and weird puzzles, but the two seem to be made for each other, a la spooky escape rooms. Today I'm going to talk about a bit of an older game, Fran Bow.
Fuck me. This game is 8 years old.
I remember being a teenager and loving this creepy little game. A game which I've actually reviewed before.
Loss of innocence is a very prominent theme in Fran Bow.
Oh yeah! That shitty old video I mentioned while talking about American McGee's Alice? I talked about Fran Bow in that video too. And my takes on it then were a little interesting.
I'm not trying to imply that Fran Bow is secretly one giant sneaky allegory for becoming a teenager.
God, I never imagined this would be haunting me so many years later. Honestly, Fran Bow felt like part of an indie horror golden age when it first came out. With games like Sally Face and Cry of Fear and The Cat Lady and fucking I'm Scared. Games that were relatively simple in gameplay and were made by very few people, but that still managed to be unique and memorable. I may just be looking at it through rose-colored glasses, but I feel like this was when indie horror was becoming truly refined and kinda hitting its peak. And then Five Nights at Freddy's got super popular, and now we're here. What sets Fran Bow apart, though, even from other games of that time, is it's not just a dark, edgy, disturbing horror game. I mean, it is that. But it's also very whimsical. It's a very Alice in Wonderland type of story, which is why I talked about it in that old video. The game follows crazy 10-year-old Fran, who lives in 1940s America. Fran's only friend is her black cat, Mr. Midnight.
What is it about mentally ill girls and cats? This is like the 5th video where I've talked about a mentally ill girl and her cat. Do you know, Roro?
Fran's life changes when her parents are mysteriously killed by a shadowy figure. She then runs into the woods, where she's found and taken to an asylum, separating her from Mr. Midnight. And basically, for the rest of the game, Fran tries to reunite with Mr. Midnight and her kindly Aunt Grace. And what follows is a wonderful, hallucinogenic trip through the depths of insanity. The first chapter has you trying to escape Oswald Asylum, distracting the cruel staff members and getting tips from the other kids. And soon you'll probably realize that Fran has maybe the best one-liners of any video game protagonist ever. Towels? Towels? I don't need towels! This music makes me think of forks. Isabel! She won't wake up. I guess that means she's heavily sedated. Fran is an incredibly well-written child character. Her dialogue is really age-appropriate, like it's stuff you'd expect of a 10-year-old. Albeit a psychotic 10-year-old. Oh, hello, Fran. How are you today? I see dead animals, miss. You mean in the television? No. I mean for real. Just forget it. And because she's so well written, the whole game feels all the more chilling as you listen to her talk about horrible loss and the abuse she and her fellow patients suffer. So Fran Bow has a very interesting and unique mechanic at its core. In the asylum, Fran speaks to a guy called Dr. Dearn, who introduces her to a wonderful drug called duotine. Ah, shit. Yeah, the meat rain wears off after about 2 weeks. Your body just needs to adjust. Yeah, in this game, you can trip and stop tripping balls at will, revealing 2 different realities. One is dark, depressing, and terrifying. And the other one appears when you get high on pills. Oh! That skeleton's gone down his skeleton hole. I hope he never comes back. I think this game is the most disturbing at the beginning because it's the most real. Like, yeah, the kids are sort of creepy or whatever, but mostly you just feel bad for them. They all have had terrible lives, and many have suffered the abuse of adults. An abuse which only continues in the asylum. One of the kids you meet even had a lobotomy, and he has this big scar across his forehead. And also, there's a lot of these weird shadow monsters in this chapter. It seems like they follow everyone around, sometimes consuming them, sometimes comforting them. And all of the adults who are trusted with the care of these children don't really seem to care much about them at all. Which, unfortunately, you'll come to see, carries on to the rest of the story. Ah! What is that?
I am Remor, the terrible black, Prince of Darkness.
Oh shit, oh fuck, it's Ozzy Osbourne, run! Fran is being hunted by a being named Remor, who vows to keep her in insanity. But honestly, he doesn't really do much, other than follow her around and, I don't know, talk shit. And it's interesting that one of the other children sees him too, and he appears in the normal world. When you first play the game, you think, alright, when she takes the pills, she goes to the other world. When she stops taking them, she's in reality. But oh no. Once Fran escapes the asylum and runs out into the woods, the lines between reality and imagination are immediately blurred. You start seeing strange creatures while sober. In one chapter, Fran even starts out high on her pills. I like how at first, the other world is just reality but with a few creatures and some added blood. But as the game goes on, Fran's pills start to take her to entirely different worlds. Like in this chapter, you think you're inside a house, but when you come down from the pills, you find that Fran has actually somehow fallen down a well with 2 corpses inside. Oh, how we're going to talk about that. This game is a masterclass in silent horror. Like that scene in the asylum where Fran looks into the operating room and finds a blood-stained bed, only to find a catatonic lobotomy victim in the room next to it. And that in particular isn't just creepy because it's real to the Fran Bow universe. It's because lobotomies are a very real part of American history, and they were performed on children. Honestly, this is the sort of game where you're the most uncomfortable thinking about what's happening in reality. And that is good symbolic storytelling. Nice job, Kill Monday. No need to thank me for hyping up your wildly popular 8-year-old game to the internet.
I'm hungry.
You know what I think is two of the most interesting parts of this game? Clara and Mia, the enigmatic conjoined twins. You wake up in their house dressed as a cat with food bowls full of meat and blood. And then these twins try to make Fran perform a ritual to separate their bodies. Fran actually ends up killing the twins by casting a different spell on them, and she finds Mr. Midnight locked up in a cage in their attic. For some reason, Mr. Midnight can talk, and he might just be the sassiest queen you'll ever meet. Also, look at his stupid little legs, I love them. Now their mission is to find Aunt Grace and go home. But as they walk across a bridge in the woods, Remor appears and breaks it. And then Fran falls and wakes up in an oddly colorful world as a tree. This chapter is called Vegetative State, probably because of all the literal vegetables walking around, but there's a popular theory about this chapter that Fran actually became paralyzed or comatose after falling in the forest, and that's why she views the experience as becoming an immobile tree. There's another explanation that I kind of like, though. This beautiful, bright land is called Ithursta, and in Ithursta, a flying axolotl doctor tells Fran that she became a tree in order to protect herself, as a sort of cocoon. Personally, I like to think that all of Ithursta is Fran's mental cocoon. Ithursta is beautiful and logical, a place that's safe, where everything makes sense, a place with wizards.
Give me your clothes. I need to smell them.
A place where she can escape in the most dire times of her life. And I think that applies to Fran's dissociation or psychosis too. In Ithursta, we're introduced to two sorts of beings, the Valakas and the Kamalas. The Kamalas being the shadow creatures who were following everyone around in the asylum, beings that feed on suffering. Valakas, on the other hand, are all-knowing beings of light. In one of the game's most poignant moments, Fran meets a Valakas and asks it who killed her parents, but the Valakas only says that she's too fragile to accept the truth, but too strong to let it go. And damn. That idea of a protagonist with a fragile child's mind still pushing through and wanting to understand the cruelty she's been dealt? It hits pretty hard. Later on in reality, you find the journal of a guy named Leon, who also saw the Kamalas and Valakas. And his journal explains what are called the 5 realities. Prime Eve, the first reality, is light and truth and goodness. It's where the Valakas are from. Every reality that came after Prime Eve gets a little bit darker. Ithursta is the second, followed by Fran's world, which is sort of the bridge between light and dark. It's also called consciousness, which by the way is very important. The darkest of the realities is where a being called Mabuka lives. The 5th reality is the end of light, darkness beyond death, darkness that drives one to suicide, its consumption by pain. And its ruler, it's pretty chill, honestly. You know, that's what I like about this game. That it's about dark and light, but not necessarily good and evil. The Kamalas are actually just Valakas waiting to be awakened from a sort of sickly state, and Rimor is from the dark 4th reality. But so is Fran's skeleton friend, Itward, shown here creepily hiding in the bushes. I'll go with you, but I don't trust you just yet. Yeah, I guess that's all that matters. Itward is referred to as the gray between realities, the one who comes from both light and dark. There's this reveal that Itward actually came to the twins as well. The twins used to be patients at Oswald Asylum, where they were stitched together in a human experiment. And then after the experiment failed, their corpses were thrown into a well. Oh god. I think the girls were basically given the same opportunity that Fran was, to see the gray between light and dark in life. But their situation was so horrible that darkness consumed them. Not even dashing Itward could convince them of the interdependency of light and dark. I wonder if anyone's made sexy fan art about Itward.
Ew! Oh my! Most unseemly! You thirsty wenches! Good heavens!
I like it, make more. Later, Itward takes Fran home on his flying machine, and even throws her a surprise birthday party with Mr. Midnight. These are some of my favorite moments of the game, where Fran actually gets to feel safe and loved. Even if it is just with her imaginary friend and definitely alive, definitely English-speaking cat. But the end of Fran's story is less nice. Basically, Fran finds her house and sends Mr. Midnight in to unlock it. But then, Dr. Deern shows up. Only, you start to realize that Dr. Deern may have been the only person who actually cared about Fran. Deern was fired for knowing too much about Oswald's human experiments. At the beginning of the game, he tried to take Fran off the pills after she fainted, because the pills were being used to experiment on her. As Dr. Deern explains it, the drug creates a door between the subconscious and the conscious, and Fran's drug specifically opened that door really wide. But as Itward explains it, the pills reveal ultra-reality, which essentially is everything everywhere all at once, hence why chaos is happening. Dr. Deern takes Fran to dig up her parents' graves, where it's revealed that Mr. Midnight is actually dead. Before she and Deern can learn who killed her parents, though, Fran has to travel through the 5th reality, a place that she explores completely sober. And what a phenomenal final area. It's like this hellish dollhouse of nightmares, but all the creatures here are just chill dudes. Like this eyeball guy. I fucking love this silly-ass eyeball guy. So when she enters the fifth reality, Fran wakes up to see that Aunt Grace has chained her to her bed. And things get very sad from here on out. For the entire game, Fran has had this delusion of Aunt Grace being a wonderful person, one who would never let the asylum staff mistreat her. But as it turns out, Grace was in on it the whole time. Dr. Oswald, the owner of the asylum, says that he had Fran's parents killed because they were interfering with his work. His work being experimenting on Fran, basically. And Aunt Grace was essentially grooming Fran to become a test subject for years. She gives this super fucked up monologue telling Fran that everything will be okay as long as she lets Dr. Oswald experiment on her. And Fran almost believes her. Until Grace drops her imaginary Mr. Midnight into the void. So Fran leaps at Grace's throat, causing Dr. Oswald to shoot her. You know, for such a whimsical game with wholesome characters and silly little moments, there really is no justice in this story. It's very much a tragedy. But Fran's mind is so imaginative and protective that she's kind of disconnected from that. Her childish wonder saves her in the end, as she basically has this fantasy of all her friends from other realities taking her to Athirsta as she dies. I still don't know many things, but one thing I do know, that between guilt and fear, I choose happiness. Fran finally lets go in the end. Mostly because she's dead. Sorry. She's been dealt such an absurdly unfair hand in life, and yet she still looks to the light. I think that whole bit about guilt refers to remorse. Oh, sorry, remorse. There's a scene where Remor is showing Fran a vision of her killing her own parents. And you know, it actually reminds me a lot of American McGee's Alice. Fran feels a kind of survivor's guilt, a remorse, which follows her around everywhere and leaves her feeling responsible for her own trauma. She saw a glimpse of Remor, of the fourth reality of darkness, when her parents were killed, and the pills only opened the realities to her more. But a lot of people have different opinions on that. I think Fran Bow is a perfect example of an overanalyzed game, and trust me, I love overanalyzing. I'm not the fun police. I'm not going to tell you not to invent granular theories about video games. But in focusing so much on what is literally real and what isn't, I think people kind of miss the point. It's like the milk game that I just talked about, where people get so caught up in the diagnosis that the game starts to mean more about the diagnosis than what is being done with it. People debate on whether the realities are real, and I'd say they are real, in a symbolic sense. But they only appear that way to Fran, because Fran is learning the lessons of darkness and light in her own childish, imaginative, psychologically horrific way. But it doesn't really matter to what extent they are real, because they're just there to represent Fran's struggle. Her challenge is ultimately to understand that darkness and light depend on each other. Something came to me when I was playing the game for this video. In Athirsta, the Valakas say that Fran has to go home because she's not ready to stay with them forever. And I think what that basically means is she was knocked unconscious but hadn't been killed, so she had to go back to her world. But when she actually was killed, she was ready. It's almost like she came to understand life just as she died. At least she got to spend her DMT trip with all her fantastical friends.
Wow. I'm fucking sad now. I really need to stop doing that to myself.
I like how after visiting other realities, it's almost like Fran can sense suffering in others. Like when she's talking with Dr. Deern, she sees his Kamala and learns that he was abused as a child, even though she would have had no way of knowing that. I think there's something there about trauma making you sensitive to the pain of others. Or, maybe she's just having some crazy trip revelations. I think point-and-click games are at their best when they embrace their own absurdity. Like, the puzzles and things will logically make sense, but they'll lead you down crazy, weird, and creative lines of thinking. And this game does absurd really well. It's been at least 5 years since I've last played it, and I still remembered a lot of the puzzles. I really miss this kind of game, these kinds of disturbing yet cartoony worlds. Honestly, maybe I'm just mourning Flash still. But Fran Bow really is a special game. There's very little I could compare it to. It's a visually fantastic, well-written, charming little game with simultaneously a very happy and very sad story.
Or maybe I just like to read way too deeply into spooky video games. I don't know, here's a bloody head.